everybody. Welcome back. Today we're looking at everybody's favorite topic, farming. And if it isn't your favorite topic, well, it should be. This coincides with Chapter 19, Section 5, Part 1. There was a lot of information in Section 5, so I split it down the middle and split it in half. And today we're going to talk about farming and farmers on the Great Plains, and specifically, what are some of the hardships that were suffered by Western farmers, because we're going to see in today's lesson that going out and claiming some land as your own and deciding to set up a farm on it, it's a lot easier than it sounds. Even if it sounds difficult, add difficulty to it, and that's farming in the Western Plains. So let's continue on our discussion with the key terms. And the three key terms we will be looking at today are sod, a sod buster, and a cooperative. And we'll talk a little bit about cooperatives today as well as tomorrow. But first, I want us to watch this video because it's going to give a little bit of insight into farming in the late 1800s, especially farming on the Great Plains. And then we will pick up right after that with our discussion.
These early settlers couldn't build their houses out of wood because there were so few trees on the prairie. Instead, they cut sod into bricks and built their homes with the dense turf of the prairie itself. These houses were called soddies. Since wood was too precious to burn, many settlers collected buffalo dung, or chips, to fuel their fires. In 1862, the United States government passed the Homestead Act, which gave away free 160 acres of federal land to people willing to settle the land. The only requirement was that a settler had to make some improvements to the land and live there for 5 years. These African-American pioneers included two brothers who escaped from slavery to Canada during the Civil War. The Homestead Act lured them and their families back to the United States, where they settled in Nebraska. Life on the prairies was hard, and not everyone succeeded. But in general, the Homestead Act was a huge success. Between 1860 and 1900, 400 million acres of prairie were turned into farmland.
And since we watched that video, I want you to now go into the Padlet that's right below the video and answer this question. How was farming on the Great Plains any different from farming in the rest of the United States? I want you to use this space to brainstorm some things that prairie farmers may have lacked, or some things that could have made their lives a little better. So I started things off for you by asking just a question that I always have is like, how is farming on the Great Plains any different than the rest of the United States? Something to keep in mind. Why was it so difficult on the Great Plains? I guess we'll find out. In the previous lessons, we talked about different Native American tribes losing their homes and their land as the United States government and settlers continued to push west. Well, in order to fill those areas that were left by the Great Plains Indians, Congress passed the Homestead Act in 1862. And the Homestead Act promised 160 acres of land to anyone that would be willing to pay a small fee and farm on that land for 5 years. It's not bad, right? So to kind of wrap our mind around this, this act promised 160 acres of land to anybody that would be willing to farm it and live on it for 5 years. And today, your average home in the suburbs will sit on about 1/8 of an acre of land. And if you're lucky, you may be able to find a house with a full acre, but that will definitely factor into the price of the house. But in 1862, the United States government was basically giving away land out in the West almost for free. And just like the California gold rush years before, thousands rushed west trying to take advantage of the free land. And it was mostly immigrants and Easterners. Unfortunately, only about 20% of the Homestead Act ended up going to small farmers, because there were a lot of large businesses that went out and took land illegally and then sold it back to farmers at a much higher price than what they had bought it from the government. The land was free, but people still had to pay to get to the land, and many really didn't have any money for the trip. But it wasn't only immigrants and Easterners that stormed west looking for free land. Thousands of African Americans rushed west, with the largest group fleeing the South at the end of Reconstruction. And they could see that at the end of Reconstruction, as their rights were slipping away, they either needed to stick around and try and make things better, or what a lot of them did, as you can see from this sign, "Ho for Kansas." So in 1879, one such group moved west that called themselves the Exodusters, after the book of Exodus from the Bible. And they believed that the West was their own version of the Promised Land. In the West, there was opportunity to just start fresh and start anew, but many that moved west soon realized that the challenge of just getting to the West was only the beginning of their hardships.
Down on me, down on me. Look like everybody all around world down on me.
In a fit of madness, I one day said to the man I was renting from, "It's no use. I works hard and raises big crops, and you sell it and keeps the money and brings me more and more in debt. So I will go somewhere else and try to make headway like white working men." So I told my wife, and she says, "Let us take to the woods in the nighttime." Well, we took to the woods, my wife and 4 children, and we was 3 weeks living in the woods waiting for a boat. Then a great many more black people came, and we was all together at the landing. Before long, the Grand Tower hove up and we got on board. Says the captain, "Where's you going?" Says I, "Kansas." John Solomon Lewis.
In 1877, the last federal troops were withdrawn from the South. Reconstruction collapsed, and new state laws began to restrict the rights of freed slaves. African Americans found themselves once again in the power of their former masters. Some favored emigrating to Liberia in Africa, or northward into Canada. To others, the open spaces of the West seemed to offer more immediate hope.
Conditions might be better 100 years from now, when all the present generation is dead and gone, but not afore, sir, not afore. And what's going to be 100 years from now ain't much account to us. The whites has the lands and the sense, and the blacks has nothing but their freedom, and it's just like a dream to them. Pap Singleton.
Benjamin Pap Singleton was an ex-slave from Tennessee who believed himself appointed by God to rescue his people. He had become convinced that there was no future for blacks unless they left the South and formed their own independent communities in the West.
Kansas seemed like an ideal place for people who were disillusioned with the black codes that had been passed in the South. The meanness of the Ku Klux Klan, the meanness of the sharecroppers who really weren't sharing the way they had agreed. And these are the people who paid $5 to Pap Singleton to come up the river to a new life in Kansas.
The West has always been seen as a place of opportunity.
and this was certainly as true for people of African descent as for anybody else. Singleton and other leaders weren't necessarily doing it for purely altruistic reasons. Like a lot of great Westerners, they were speculators in land and hoped to make their fortunes. But they did have a vision of a place where people of color could breathe free, could be a part of the West, and all of those things that the West has come to mean both at that time and since.
The black immigrants called themselves exodusters because, like the Old Testament Hebrews, they believed their salvation lay in reaching a promised land. Soon, blacks were scattered across eastern Kansas, and their hopeful letters home were being read aloud in black churches. Then, in the spring of 1879, a rumor raced through African American communities throughout the Deep South that the federal government had set aside all of Kansas for former slaves, providing every black family that could get there with free land and $500. It wasn't true, but it was enough to convince some 6,000 people to start west. Some went by riverboat as far as St. Louis. Others, too poor to pay their passage, walked the whole way.
Governor's Mansion, Topeka, Kansas. Last Saturday, I had a call from a delegation of 100 leading colored men from the states of Mississippi and Alabama. They said that they had rather die in the attempt to reach the land where they can be free than to live and die in the South any longer. Governor John P. St. John.
By 1880, more than 15,000 African Americans had migrated to Kansas. Most of them settled on farms and in small communities like Junipertown, Dunlap, Rattlebone Hollow, and Nicodemus.
When I landed on the soil of Kansas, I looked on the ground and I says, "This is free ground." Then I looked on the heavens, and I says, "Them is free and beautiful heavens." Then I looked within my heart, and I says to myself, "I wonder why I was never free before." I said, "Let us hold a little prayer meeting on the riverbank." It was raining, but the drops fell from heaven on a free family, and the meeting was just as good as sunshine. We was thankful to God, and we prayed for those who could not come. I asked my wife, did she know the ground she stands on? She said no. I said, "It is free ground," and she cried for joy.
By the late 1880s, the free land in the West was really disappearing, so the United States government forced several Native American nations to sell their land in Oklahoma. And remember, this Oklahoma territory had been promised to them forever, but since more people were pushing west, they needed more room, so they said, "All right, you need to get out of here." And once the land had been purchased, the government announced that settlers could stake their claims to free homesteads, but were not able to do so until April 22nd, 1889. Now, on that day, over 100,000 people lined up and rushed into Oklahoma on horseback, buggy, or even on foot. And at noon, a shot rang out and the race was on, but many of the best claims had already been taken by quote-unquote Sooners that had sneaked into the land before the official opening and laid their claim. And our next video is going to show a little bit about the Oklahoma land rush.
No wish to fight.
Texas, Daniel! Here they come!
Stand by, partner, and pretend you're out of breath.
Pretend? My heart's up here in my nose.
Oh my God, Nora! Oh, this is thrilling! Nora! No, Nora! No!
Now, I mentioned to you earlier that getting to the West was the first of many hardships that the homesteaders would face, and I didn't lie to you. Once the farmers got to the West and were able to claim their land, then what? Where would they live? Where would they get food? The land was was open with very, very few towns, if any towns existed at all. And there's a reason why this area is called the Great Plains. It's because there are rolling hills, wide open spaces, and very, very few trees. So, without trees for lumber, where would people get their houses? Well, many answer that question by looking right at the ground. Now, the soil out in the Great Plains was very fertile, but it was tough to get to because it was covered with a thick layer of sod that was tough enough to crack even the strongest wooden or iron plows. So farmers realized that, hey, this stuff is really durable, so they would cut up that sod and build houses out of it. And the houses were held together with the roots, and we're actually looking at a family sitting in front of a sod house right now. It would leak, there were animals, but at this point, it's better than nothing. And some people just absolutely hated these houses, while others thought, really, they were the best thing in the world. And I really guess it depends on your point of view whether or not sod houses were good or bad. And in 1877, steel plows were introduced that could bust through the sod, and once those hit the market, it really helped farmers to take control of their land. And along with these new plows came new threshing machines, reapers, and harvesting machines. So there was a growth in farming equipment that really, really helped to benefit the sod busters. Another thing that farmers on the Great Plains really had to deal with was the climate. And it was the climate on the Great Plains dry, extremely dry. Rain was very infrequent, so without a water source, the crops, what do they do? What do plants do when they don't get enough water? They shrivel up and die. Not to mention the fact that humans were made up of about 70% water. Water is kind of important to us too. So farmers got around this lack of rainwater by building large windmills that would pump water up from hundreds of feet underground. The windmills were great because the wind would just whip across the plains and it would help to turn the cranks to pump the water up. So now, through the use of these windmills, farmers could have a fairly consistent source of water. But the dry climate also brought dust storms and the threat of fire at any time. Summer months brought insects and grasshoppers that would eat the crops. And in the winter months, the snow would bury farm animals and would trap people inside of their homes. So when I told you that life on the Great Plains was tough, I wasn't kidding. It was very, very difficult.
It is hard to imagine what it must have felt like to arrive at last after a long journey, having sold most of what you owned, to look out over an unfamiliar landscape, knowing this would be where your family would undoubtedly live for generations to come. To know you would have to rely on the earth, the weather, willpower, and the luck to survive. Work had to begin immediately. The first thing to do would be to get a roof over your head. So if you had trees on your land, you would build a log cabin. But on the great desolate plains of western Nebraska and Kansas, trees were few and far between, so you would build your house of sod, brick-shaped clumps of prairie dirt and grass. From these crude materials, houses, sometimes even fancy ones, were constructed. Long ago, a visitor to a sod house described a conversation with her hostess in which she said, "Something similar to a fine hail is descending on my face and hands." And her hostess replied, "Go back to sleep. It's only the wind redistributing the building." Such was life inside a sod house. Having provided shelter, the next concern was to find a reliable source of water. And on the arid high plains, this could be a real problem. As one settler put it, "I reckon there ain't no freedom here except to die of thirst." Wells were sometimes dug by hand 25 feet deep, only to strike solid rock and come up dry. Then the frontier farmer had to begin his search all over again. In later times, wells could be mechanically drilled, and the most reliable source of energy on the plains, wind, was used to pump the water. By the 1880s, windmills could be found everywhere, and they became a symbol of the victory of the homesteader over the harshness of the prairie. Once the pioneer family had acquired water and shelter, the real business of homesteading, farming, could begin. One young Nebraska settler described the unfamiliar landscape to his mother in the east. "Ma, you can see as far as you please here, and almost every foot in sight can be plowed." Farming began by plowing the land so that it could be planted with seed. Early farmers on the plains were named sodbusters after the plows they used. These plows could turn over an unbroken strip of ground 12 to 18 inches wide and several inches deep, making a sound like a heavy piece of fabric being torn in half as they cut through the earth. Horses, or oxen, were used to pull the plow, and plowing up 160 acres was no easy job. After the soil was plowed, it had to be harrowed. By harrowing the plowed fields, big clods of earth were broken up and the surface was leveled for planting.
But despite all of these harsh conditions, and every season brought new harsh conditions, farmers were able to persevere and actually thrive on the Great Plains. It wasn't long before farmers were selling wheat and corn back in eastern cities, as well as shipping it into Europe. But this boom in agriculture had an unexpected effect. With so much more food flooding the market, farmers were earning less and less for their goods and for the goods that they sold. Prices dropped, and Western farmers were no longer earning enough money to be able to repay their debts. Many of them had gone into debt purchasing farm equipment or even trying to purchase tickets to get out to the Great Plains in the first place. So as early as the 1860s, some farmers started banding together to improve their positions and try to protect their profits. And in 1867, the National Grange was established to help boost farm profits and protect farmers from the high rates railroad companies were charging. And members of the National Grange started calling themselves grangers, and these grangers also encouraged farmers to set up cooperatives, and cooperatives would help the farmers to buy grain in bulk at a discounted rate, as well as to help organize and utilize their voting rights. But we're going to talk about how they use those voting rights in the upcoming section. But it's interesting to note that National Grange was founded in 1867. It still exists to this day and is still helping farmers to organize and to have a voice in the government. So, good stuff. Which brings us to our assignment for today. Now, using your textbook, pages 562 to 566, especially there's an extra added section on page 567. Your assignment is to imagine that you are going to go back in time to visit a sodbuster family in 1880. All right? So this is the compass. You're going to go back in time to visit a sodbuster family living on the Great Plains. But when you go back, you are only allowed to take one modern invention with you. Now, your invention or innovation should be something that makes the farming family's life easier, and so it can either be something that currently exists, or you can make up your own invention, something of your own creation. Now, once you decide on what to bring, you will have two different options for your assignment. Okay, so option one. For option one, you'll be required to write a few paragraphs describing what you would take and why you would take it, and then write a second paragraph giving instructions to the farmer on how to use your item. So in your description, you need to use the following details. You need to describe what you will take, describe how it will benefit a farmer on the Great Plains in the 1880s, and then include a list of step-by-step instructions on how the farmer will use this invention. Now, remember, if you plan on taking something back to 1880 that uses electricity, like you think, oh, hey, they could use a cell phone. Well, there's going to need to be some sort of power source. And remember, that what were the houses made of? Yes, they were made out of dirt. So you can't really plug an iPhone into a dirt wall. So you're going to need to either think of like backup batteries, or maybe some other form, some other power source that maybe would be better than trying to plug into dirt. So this is going to cause you may have to think a little bit outside the box for this one, but I'm looking forward to seeing what you create. So option 1 is going to be just writing paragraphs. Option 2 is very similar to option 1 in that you're still going to choose an invention to send back to a Sodbuster family, but for this option you can draw an illustration of the invention or of the farmer using that item, or may even create a poster showing like this is why you should be using it, and provide a paragraph giving the farmer a list of how it would benefit him and how to use it. So it's similar to the first option in that you're coming up with an invention still, but this time you can, if for those of you that are very gifted with, you would prefer to draw a picture than to write paragraphs, option 2 is for you. If you're like me and you have all these great ideas and all these pictures in your head, but you really don't have a creative way of transferring that to a piece of paper, maybe you'll go with option 1. Either way, you have both options and they are at your disposal. So good luck. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. Have a great rest of your day.